All right, Stephanie, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me.
I'm super excited about this conversation. Mental health and self-care and the outdoors are like my jam. So
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, we touched base, and I can relate a lot to a lot of the things that you've been
yeah.
through and that you're sharing. So this is going to be really cool. Go ahead and let's talk about the 10 years of experience that you got under your belt.
Sure. Yeah. So it's more like almost 13 years now in the mental health field. I started working with kids with autism, and one thing about kids with autism is they say it like it is, and a lot of times, for example, if a kiddo with autism would like fart in public, their parents would be like, "Oh my God, it's so embarrassing." It's like, no, I don't understand why it is. It's just normal human behavior. And working with children and their families, you get a whole well-rounded, a systematic approach to understanding the human because there's so many variables and moving pieces, and different perspectives and beliefs, really. And so, as I moved along in my journey, my husband and I met, and at as after our second child, I got diagnosed with PTSD, and that was a significant challenge because I knew that I had already made some serious mistakes with the first two, that I was feeling really shameful and guilty about. By the time we had our third, I was well into my healing journey, both physical, mental health, eating health, sleeping health, all the things that require a healthy human. And then a couple years ago, actually, it'll be 2 years in January, I decided that I wanted to go out on my own and really break a lot of the patterns that we kind of fall into as mental health professionals. One being a governing body telling us what we can and cannot do with our clients, and taking health insurance and being stuck in the broke sick care system. The system wants you to stay sick, they don't want you to get better. And so I decided to start my own brand, Safety in Freedom LLC, where we help people find safety in the freedom they create with their life by their design and not by anybody else's. And so we work with divorced dads, married moms, and help them really have the conversation they crave to have and say it like it is.
That's a lot. That's really cool, though, because I,
Yeah.
I like how that ties into what I do as far as putting my story out there to kind of inspire people that are struggling with a lot of
Mm,
things. And it brings them kind of step by step into someone like your office
yeah.
who can relate and can kind of help them on an avenue that they feel like they're still in charge of.
Absolutely. One of our biggest desires is to make sure people know that you are not broken. Your brain works a certain way, your body reacts a certain way, but you're not broken. And good, bad, or indifferent, you're an amazing human exactly how you are. And you're loved no matter what you believe you're not worthy of love, or, because of you are the way you are, you're not deserving of love. Like, we try to really break those belief systems in people.
And I know firsthand that's a very challenging belief system to start to break.
It is, because it's at the core of the foundation of the human. It starts in childhood, is, between ages 2 and 6 is when our emotional system is really developed, and our blind beliefs, as I would say, beliefs are thoughts that we stopped questioning. And so in childhood, we're just told to believe and feel and think a certain way, and we do, and we don't question it until we kind of hit like a rock spot and really start to dig into that foundation and figure out what it was made out of.
That makes perfect sense because I'm sitting here thinking back to when my whole journey started.
Mm.
Sitting in my truck and being homeless and alone, saying, I just invested 10 years into all this, and it was that easy to throw me away. And I think back to my childhood, it was kind of a lot of the same things.
Mm.
And at that point, I realized, this whole thing isn't working for me. So it's time to find a different approach. And that approach kind of was spun into some amazing, amazing things because I began to tackle them.
Nice. I'd love to hear, what are some of the approaches?
Well, I've actually started putting confidence within myself. I've been, I guess, finding my own worth within me
Mm,
as opposed to somebody else defining it for me. And I've done a lot of that, um, having that conversation where you just tell it like it is to yourself, and
yeah.
you learn the situation around you and you just kind of adapt to it and make that reality yours.
And that's such a challenging task for so many people. That's actually, I tend to work with people pleasers or rescuers, and every client, including myself, I combat this on a daily basis. Just today, having a long conversation with my husband around, what I crave. I just turned 30, and we've been together 11 years. And like when I was 19, I craved a lot of things, and I've gotten all those things, and now I'm 30 and I'm like, now what? I got the degrees, I got the business, I got the family, I got the husband, I got the outdoorsy stuff, and I'm starting to figure out who I am. And so it's like, well, now what? And now I'm craving all this other adventure and this spontaneity and this real um experience. And so being the completely different person that I am now, I feel almost shameful of like the things that I crave, because he's happy being a dad and being a husband and a homeowner and a boss. He doesn't, and he loves history. That's his thing, is like history and books and law. And so I'm like, well, but how do we stay connected? How do we continue to build our relationship when we both are just craving different things? And it feels like I'm spending 2 days in the mountains. New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, I'll be just camping out in the woods by myself. And I feel so selfish that he's sitting at home with 3 children on a holiday, quote unquote, a holiday for most people. And I'm just out there chilling in the woods, like
Right.
feels super selfish. But he's like, no, it's okay. Like, I want you out there. I'm excited to support you. I'm excited to provide that up, to share that opportunity with you, for you to go and just do what you want to do. But it still feels like this is so unequal.
Yeah. And I think that's a difficult thing to look outside the box at and find that kind of understanding is,
Mm,
you're out here living all this stuff and
yeah.
it takes sacrifice on the other end. However, they are getting, I guess, what they need out of it as well. And that's what makes that train keep rolling.
I think the challenging piece is I think it's a sacrifice, because I would totally, like, you want me to sit at home with the kids while you go do whatever you want to do? Like, I don't think so. Like, to me, that would feel like a sacrifice. To him, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. And so understanding each other's perspectives is like, especially this whole new version of perspectives, is something that we're working on figuring out together.
Yeah. And, I can relate because, like I said, I've been married before and
Mm,
all the hunting and fishing trips. And, I'm out there doing my thing and, you're home and whatever. And I don't know where the disconnect ever came up that I'm in the situation reality I am now.
mm.
However, I can understand that when I have that conversation.
I love it. And I'm sure most people listening can definitely understand too, especially your listeners are probably a lot of outdoorsy people who love to just go spend time in nature.
Yeah, there's some of them out there, and then there's people that actually have no idea at all. Look at me that I'm crazy because I go out there and do that.
Like, and people are like, you want to spend a night in like the tallest mountain range in New Hampshire, in New England, and in the woods in the middle of the winter. It's like, yeah, doesn't that sound like so much fun? They're like, no, not at all.
Well, it's like my birthday is coming up, and up here, in Michigan, with it being wintertime and everything's frozen over, I'm getting ready to go ice fishing, and people are looking at me like, "You're crazy. You're going to stand on the ice."
Yeah.
It goes in a cup, not under your feet. And I'm like, you don't understand the adventure of it.
Yeah. And the planning of it. So speaking of the adventure of it, this book that we were talking about before, savers and those like thrift shops, they actually, you can find some pretty decent stuff. And this book was written in 1985, Mountain Experience, The Psychology and Sociology of Adventure by Richard Mitchell Jr. And in the book, he talks about the planning that goes into mountain experiences and or not well, yes, for this book particularly mountain experiences, but what I've found in general across the board with being outdoors, you have to learn how to survive off of what you've brought in and what you have around you. And being in high elevation, it's very different than being in a typical forest. There's not always coverage like the mountains I'm going in there. It's all above tree line. So being properly protected is very important. And so people are like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to put yourself in danger, as they would see it? And it's like, it's not about the danger. It's about the thrill of making it through and knowing that your skills and you're prepared enough to know when to turn back if you need to, and to be prepared to keep yourself safe. And so to get back to the book, it talks about how back in the 80s, they didn't have these devices that we all know exactly where we are in our GPS, and we can press this SOS button if we need some help and be medevaced off the mountain or whatever it is. I will die
Right.
before ever having that, by the way. No, just kidding. Just kidding. I do not want to be the person in the news, woman rescued off, huge mountain. That's like the worst. But they had to make phone calls back then, and the gear back then compared to the gear now, the gear has improved astronomically. So if you're do your research and you're prepared properly, it's really just an adventure in nature instead of feeling like you need to stay safe in your small home, in your small community, or wherever you are, right? That I don't need my
Right.
home to feel safe. My safety is right in my heart.
See, and to me, it's a lot of kind of putting yourself out there to funnel that self trust,
Mm,
which brings up an interesting point to mind. Is when you were explaining the book back, before this whole journey began for me, I had no problem at all going out in the wild and trusting myself and my instincts and everything. However, in the early stages of this journey, I couldn't trust myself at all in the
mm,
everyday real world, like, aspects of life. That was the scariest thing in the world. And it's such a drastic change and such a drastic difference because I can go out in the wild where there's no safety net
mhm.
and I'll be all right. However, picking something for dinner was like the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I've never actually thought about it that way. And that is, even in my own experience, is so true. Like, how the hell do I parent a child of 7-year old who has got dyslexia? Like, I mean, I've got all the skills in the book, and there's days where my skills don't freaking work. And I'm just like ripping my hair out. Like, I don't know how to do this. And in the mountains, I feel like I can I still have some learning, lots of learning to do. And well, by the way, there's always learning to do. So anyone who says, "Well, I know everything," watch out. Don't go in the woods with them because they're
Right.
gonna be too cocky and put you in harm's way. There's always learning to do, but I am so confident in the fact that I can learn something new or think on the go and be creative. Like, I'm not so confident where I believe and think that I know everything, but I'm confident where I can be creative and find answers for myself. Where parenting a child with dyslexia is like, I don't know. I don't have answers. And sometimes I'm just sitting there like, short of just staring at her when she's having an
Yeah.
issue like that, as the only thing I can do is like stare and hug. That's like the only answer. It's really difficult to have that struggle or that pressure from society to perform. And I think nowadays things are just so different than they were, say, 20 years ago, with society and social media. If you're doing one thing, you're wrong. And if you're doing another thing, if you're doing the opposite, you're still wrong. If you're nursing, you're wrong. If you're formula feeding, you're still wrong, right? No matter what you
Right.
do in life. And if you're too uh, outspoken, then you're wrong. But if you're too quiet, you're also wrong. Like there's always somebody with some opinion about how you should be doing things differently to meet their needs.
Yeah, I definitely noticed a lot of that too, especially in the last few years.
Mm,
Because I've always been, kind of a quiet person anyway. And since everything has happened, I've gotten even more, I guess, recluse or shut in.
mm,
So I've become even more quiet. And that seems to, like, I don't know if it affects people around me. However, like people that I encounter in my day-to-day life, they give me a hard time about it because when the downtime comes, instead of standing around socializing, I'll go find a quiet place to just sit and regroup and recover my energy.
mm.
And it's no different than when I take the time when I have the time to go out in the wild and do those things. It's kind of, I don't know if the two things have kind of coincided together and become one, and that's just what makes sense to me. But I know it's a coping mechanism either way.
It is, yes. And so I was actually going to start writing because I always take notes so that I don't forget, but then I can still continue to listen. Basically, what I'd like to kind of bring there is impulse versus intention. That is something that has just been screaming at me in my world, both personally and professionally. A lot of time, like before you had this big awakening of yourself and your new journey, you probably were living life in a very impulsive way. You were reacting to whatever had happened in that day or in that week or whatever in that relationship, where now you're starting to get this clarity around intention and being intentional for you first, filling up your cup first, and then deciding where you're going to where you're going to spill that into other people's cups. People pleasers in particularly, we tend to just like spill in everyone's cup.
Right.
And we can't do that because then we're depleting ourselves. And this whole term unconditional love, there's great times to be selfless and to give your love genuinely to somebody without expecting anything in return. With that said, though, in the overall relationship, any relationship we invest our time in, most, not all, but especially the close ones, like the husband or the partner and the children and, the brothers and the siblings and the parents, those really close relationships, it's important to have a good, healthy reciprocation. When I'm here for you, it's because I love you. And I'm here the way you need me to or the way you want me to. And so asking for that in return should be okay. But for some reason, there's a lot of misconception around this term unconditional love. Like, and the people pleasers tend to, there's a quote, and I don't remember who said it. Givers have to take none. Givers have to set boundaries because takers have none. Right. So that
Yes.
idea, exactly. And so when givers set boundaries, it's good we're setting boundaries, but then what that quote doesn't say is givers also deserve to receive. And so when we stand up and ask, people are like, what do you mean you want love from me? You're just my love machine. They kind of often react to the givers.
Right. At that point, it's kind of like you've asked, and because the pattern has been the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
oh, now you want something in return, I've got to throw you to the curb and I'll go on to the next.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to
Now,
get stuck.
unfortunately, you have enough of those events happen, and then finally you end up saying, one day, this doesn't work anymore. I've got to change my whole approach.
Mm. Doesn't mean I have to cut you out. Doesn't mean I have to hate you. Doesn't mean I have to resent you or be angry with you. Just means that I have to change my approach. And working together as a team on how that's going to work is important if you're deciding to remain committed to whatever the relationship is. It doesn't have to be a partner, just best friend. For me, my relationships on the trail are very specific. I'm not sure. I'd love to hear your end of how things work in the woods. For us in the trail on the trails in the White Mountains, the White Mountains has some of the worst weather that this country has ever seen. And so it's very easy to get into a pickle no matter how much you've protected yourself, prepared for
Right.
whatever it is. And so when you're on the trail with these people, you want to be able to trust these people with your life. And I wouldn't trust, I won't name specific relationships, but there's relationships that I should be able to trust in my life with them. And I wouldn't want to be stuck in any bank robbery or whatever it is with some of
Right.
the closer relationships in my life. So I have a stronger bond with some of the people on trail than I do in any other areas of my life because of the need for it.
Yeah, and see where I'm at, it's usually pretty predictable if you're going out for the day, what's going to happen weather-wise. So as far as what I do, I've always kind of used the outdoors as my isolation and whatnot. I've been very self-resilient about it. I may go fishing with somebody, 9 times out of 10 I do. However, when I go out to hunt, it's a total solo adventure. And, I pack and I prepare and I'm ready to go. And I know throughout the day I'll be able to rely on myself. However, when I'm on the water with somebody, it's 9 times out of 10 I'm taking the lead and I'm kind of showing, let's do this, let's do that. In fact, it's funny. That's how this whole project got started. Was the very first article that I ever wrote about it was comparing anxiety to fishing.
Uh-huh.
Be- because when you cast your lure out there and you're presenting your presentation, you're trying to look like you're having the biggest anxiety attack in the world in order to trigger the bigger fish to come out and eat
Okay. Okay.
you. And as I was trying to explain that, it kind of hit me. I was like, I go through all these panic attacks and everything. I feel like I'm that little fish in the water trying to be eaten. So it was
Mm.
kind of becoming a way to, I guess, work those feelings and those whole notions out within a way that I could see them.
Mm. Interesting. I have my mountaineering or avid mountain climber experiences have only it's been a year now. In September it was a year is when I started my journey. There's a list called the 48 4,000 footers, and most people don't complete them. I completed them, I think, in like 6 months or something like that. So I fell in love with it and I went head over heels and didn't look back. And I got diagnosed with a chronic condition in between all of that. And I still was like, I am not giving up. This is part of my life. So I haven't necessarily stopped to think about how mountaineering or mountaineering is a little bit different than the White Mountains, but you can get some mountaineering experience depending on the terrain and the weather. I haven't necessarily thought about what that looks like and how that chaos can present itself. I guess the actually when I hear wind, um, it actually feels aggressive when it's windy and rainy. It feels like somebody's mad at me because when I was a kid, I was taught that God and the angels were either bowling or they're really mad and we need to be quiet. It was like their way of trying to get us to have quiet time. And so now when I'm in the mountains, I have to remind myself that clouds and wind and whatever else for noises does not mean somebody is mad at me. And so getting through the trail and on the trail, yeah, I don't know that there's a comparison to say PTSD and an experience in the mountains.
I think now that I've mentioned something like that, it's going to stick in the back of your head, and
Yeah.
somewhere along the journey, you're going to figure it out.
I'm gonna be like, damn that, Mike.
Because I never once put the two together, and I never even bothered to think about it that way. And
Mm.
then, we were out fishing, and I was trying to actually show somebody how to properly do a jigging technique, and We were talking about anxiety and everything anyway. And I was like, wait a minute, those things look like the same thing.
Mm.
Because when I go to the store and I have my panic attacks and whatnot, that's literally what it feels like is I'm running around looking for like, the closest rock or something to hide behind, hoping that I don't get eaten.
Yeah. I would say it manifests on the climb. If anything, it's like, I gotta get to the top. I gotta get to the top. Rush, 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 get to the top. And you get to the top and you're like, oh my God, this view, I need to savor this view. I'm never gonna have this view again. I need to take all the pictures. And then you're on your way down. It's like, shit, what even happened at the top? Because you were so focused
Right.
on the next moment and not the current moment. And so that's definitely a huge transition in my life, and how that manifested in my personal life is not rushing to get to the next moment and really just focusing on breathing and taking steps and breathing and taking steps.
Absolutely. It's more about living within the moment, realizing that you're here today and it's making the best of today because, tomorrow's not guaranteed.
Mm,
Just like the concept of when you're coming back down and you can't remember what the hell happened when you were up there.
yeah,
Those memories aren't guaranteed to be there.
no, they're not.
I think that's probably how this whole like Project Mindfully Outdoors thing really got rolling. Because I like to take the concept of the outdoors and add that mindful, deep, thought provoking philosophy aspect to it, I guess.
And it is a really amazing way of getting into ourselves, and like I was saying earlier, that foundation, building that foundation in a way that it is by your design, and breaking free of those old patterns. The outdoors has such a sense of freedom, and naturally where we are supposed to be as humans anyway. Living
Right.
segregated in homes, living with food readily available is what's caused obesity and diabetes and heart diseases and all these other things, because we're what do I call that? We're a trained society. We are impulse driven, and
Yes.
marketing and everything really plays on our brain's ability to be impulsive.
Yeah. And as you get out there more and more, you really got no option other than to just
Sit in
slow
your
down.
shit.
Right. And I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. Before everything happened, it was more of I got out to isolate and I never put a lot of thought into it. And then as this whole journey started, I started to really get scared of the process because I didn't want to sit with myself. I didn't want to face those things. And now that I've come this far along the path, I love the fact that I can sit with myself and
Mm,
I'm comfortable and I'm okay with it. I can deal with the thoughts and, there's nothing more to be afraid of.
oh, so beautiful. So beautifully said.
And it's one of those things that overcoming all the obstacles and the adversity tends to teach you. It's no different than developing your skill set in the outdoors.
Mm, depending, yeah, choosing like what for me, it's, what layers do I need? What gloves do I need? How much water do I need? When's the next spring, leak, because there, if you run out of water, where's a shelter? um Deciding on all those chess moves that
Right.
are either going to send you in the right direction or the wrong direction are really powerful when you take that into your personal, out of the woods and back into your societal reality.
Absolutely. And the more you do it, the more you get comfortable and eventually you start to walk and then you start to run.
Mm.
You build that connection, and that connection, they tend to just tie together. I could say the same thing and compare it to my connection to deer hunting. Is like I'll go out, and normally I'm literally looking for maybe one or two specific deer throughout the year. I've named them, and through the whole process, I built this whole connection with them, this whole story in my head. Because let's
It
face it,
happens with the mountains too.
you're sitting out there and you've built this connection to something. There's nothing else to do to pass the time
Mm.
besides tell yourself stories.
Mm.
And I can actually tell you a funny story about it. And it's funny because I've never named a doe up until literally the day that my divorce got finalized.
Oh wow.
The hearing was in the morning, so I went out for an afternoon evening hunt, and I wasn't exactly in the greatest mood. So I got there and I seen a deer probably about 70 yards out, and immediately I cocked my crossbow and I took off trucking after that deer. Well, I slipped the thought of looking around me and taking in what else was around. I got probably about 20 yards out, and I heard this other doe huff and stomp, and she ended up scaring everybody off. So everybody spooked, ran away. About a week later, I ran into her, and she brought a buck with her. So he ended up coming home.
Mm.
And then 2 or 3 hunts later, I finally got her.
Mm.
But it was just crazy the way that that connection came, because in between the start of it and the end of it, there was countless interactions, and there'd be days I wouldn't see anything, and I'd be leaving, and she'd be standing on the side of the road just looking at me. And then we had our final moment, and that was the end of that.
Yeah.
But it's a story, and it's really a whole thing that I'll have a memory that I'll never let go of, and I'll be able to tell stories and pass down. And that's really one element of the outdoors that, regardless of what you go out there for, at the end of the day, coming home to share the story is a very, very important thing.
Oh, so true. We all don't have death wishes. We are just so excited to enjoy our life the way we as humans were meant to enjoy in the nature. For me, a translation to that would be my first winter hike was on the Kinsmans, the North and South Kinsman, which are two. I'm trying to see where they are on my little list behind my computer here, how big they are. I think they're towards the top of the list a little bit. And never winter hiked, but I did smaller stuff, but nothing crazy. This was like snowshoes, a foot of snow, trailblazing the entire way, 7 or 8 miles to get to the summit. And we're like 300 feet from the summit of the first mountain. And the person that I was with, is the first time I had met him. And he starts cramping up, and so I'd never met him. So we didn't have a trail relationship. So I was just like, you're right. Like, what's happening? Like, I didn't know what to do. And he was just like, not really working with me at that time. He was just kind of being like, wanting to do his own thing. Didn't trust me enough. And so he's like, I can't, we really got to turn around. So an 11-mile day turned into I think it was like 9-mile day or something like that, turned into like a 14-mile day. Ran out of water, was running out of sunlight. It was a day that I broke, as I would say, broke myself. Like the mountains broke me. And so I'd be like, fuck you, Kinsman's, like, damn you, Kinsman, excuse my language. So now every time I've hiked those mountains 3 times now. And every time I go to hike those mountains, it's that same sensation of like, I'm gonna claim you. You are mine. Like, like you
Right.
claimed me once and I'm back for revenge 2 more times. Like, it's this sense of challenge that felt like I had failed. It felt like, I wasn't doing good enough. It felt like all of these, head trashy kind of statements, as I would say, head trash, um, was so infuriating to the point where I couldn't even drive home. I needed to get a hotel. I broke myself that night. And I literally was like sitting in the bathtub in the hotel, like bawling my eyes out. I felt so sick because I had pushed my body to limits that I had never pushed it before. And so I feel like those kind of breaking moments are really important in healthy ways.
They
That
really are.
was too far of a breaking moment. I could have done that in a much more responsible way. Knowing the person before going on this crazy hike, having no idea where we were. So we had to backtrack. Good thing it was a bunch of snow and I could have found my way if something happened. There was some danger to it that now I'm like looking back, if my kids ever did that, I'd be pissed. Um, so yeah, there's a level of quote unquote breaking yourself of those limits that we set these limits in our head based on our experiences in society. And if we don't take charge of those limitations that we place on ourselves, or blind beliefs, as I would call them, then they will take charge of us. And so that day was a day where I like broke my ceiling of limits. And now I know where my range is, right? And
Right.
good thing it wasn't like Mount Washington or something crazy like that. But now I know how to take care of myself in a very confident but not cocky way. Yeah.
Well, I think to spin back to the very beginning of that, congratulations, because you realized what most of outdoor adventures are. You lose a lot more than you win.
Exactly. Mother Nature has her own plan, no matter how hard you try to plan.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
each one of those, I guess, quote unquote, losses, there's a lesson to be learned within it.
Yes.
And that's what fuels at least me to go out there,
Yeah.
is whether it's successful or, like I said, you're going to lose a lot more than you win. Either way, you're going to learn something about, whatever it is you're out there doing, and or about yourself,
Mm.
because it's that adversity that gets people to go forward and gets people to learn something.
Mm. One of our core values at Safety and Freedom is commit, experience, and create change. Don't let change hold you back. Change is the scariest thing for most people. And if you can just be determined and resilient to commit, experience, and create that change, it will no longer be scary. It'll be something you crave and look forward to.
Yeah, you kind of stumped me there for a second, because I'm living that exact experience.
That's awesome.
I was I was afraid to ever end up where I've been for the past few years on this journey, and the fact that I've had to walk it, and I've seen the changes, and experienced the highs of it and walked through the lows of it. Change is something that everybody needs. We're always evolving.
And back to that, your point previously is that safety is within here. It's not in a building. It's not in a blanket. It's not in a room or another person or a car or a boss or a job, wherever it is. It's in here. So anything in your life can be ripped away from you within seconds. But nobody can take your safety from within you away unless you give it away.
Right. There's a lot of stoic quotes about exactly that,
Mm.
that as long as you understand, these things are going to happen, because it's part of what nature's laid out for your course. You just got to find the acceptance and deal with them, because you're capable.
Yeah. You are not broken. I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
That is exactly it. Well, I'm thinking, go ahead and let everybody know where they can reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. So Facebook, Instagram, My website is safetyinfreedom.com, safety in freedom.com. And you can, if you're like, oh, I'd love to talk to Stephanie and figure out what she's all about and how she might be able to help me, you can go to safetyinfreedom.com/call, where you can pick a time just to sit down and chat.
Awesome. I greatly appreciate the time to sit down and chat with you tonight, Stephanie. This
Yeah,
was
you're
a fun
welcome.
conversation.
I agree. Thank you.
So you're gonna have to come back and tell us how your adventure went.
This weekend, absolutely. I'd love to have another chat.
Awesome. Well, until next time.
Yes.